Hi, I'm Hector Garcia, CPA and Advanced QuickBooks Pro Advisor. And one of the main things that I do for my customers is help them choose the right time tracking app. When we think of time tracking apps, we're thinking of solving the following pain points. One, tracking the time that our employees actually work and approving those timesheets in order to prepare payroll. Two, assigning jobs or projects to the specific time in order to job cost or calculate the labor cost spent on those projects. Three, managing for scheduling or future capacity to make sure that the employees are assigned the right jobs and the right time frames in order to complete the jobs on time. And four, eventually billing those hours to our customers, assuming that we are working on billable time and materials type projects. So to look for those apps, we're going to click on the Apps tab on the left-hand side of QuickBooks Online. And then in the search box, we're going to type time tracking. One of the apps you're going to see is Tsheets Time Tracking. And for the other app, it's going to be Harvest. And there it is. There's Harvest. Let's go ahead and start setting up Tsheets. So I'm going to click on the Tsheets icon. Click on Learn More. And after I click on Learn More, I'm going to follow the prompts to get the app set up. In this demo of Tsheets, which should take about 15 minutes, we're first going to do an app setup and general overview. Then we're going to create a schedule. Then we're going to enter a manual time entry using the web app. And then we're going to use the Tsheets phone app to track time. Then we're going to learn how to track who's actively working or clocked in. Then we're going to learn how to clock out or switch projects within the phone app. Then we're going to work with reports. We're going to learn how to approve timesheets. And finally, process payroll inside QuickBooks using Tsheets data. Throughout the demonstration, we'll be going back and forth between Tsheets and QuickBooks Online so you can see the workflow. It is important to note that we're going to set up Tsheets from the perspective of the small business user. So if you're an accounting professional, you may need to request administrative access to be able to set up this app for your client. And once the account is set up with Tsheets, we're going to go straight into the home screen. And the first thing that we should do is go through the settings. So we're going to click on Company Settings under the Setup tab. And on the first page, we're going to have simple information such as company information, the Tsheets web address. The Tsheets web address is the actual link that any employee is going to put on their web browser in order to log into Tsheets and clock in and clock out, assuming they're not going to be using the phone app and they're going to be using the web-based version. Then under payroll and overtime, they can set up when does the week start, what's the default payroll schedule. In this case, we have it set up for weekly. And under overtime, what the overtime policy looks like. So starting how many hours you would like Tsheets to start calculating overtime hours as a different type of hour than the regular hours. And you may need to check with your state to see what the specific overtime policies are. Then under time options, we can actually have different settings here. One is we can allow employees to manage their own timesheets. That means that they can create manual time entries instead of simply just clocking in and clocking out. You can also allow or disallow whether the employees are going to add notes or additional information to each time they track their time. Under pay time off, you can enable PTO, which allows Tsheets to also track, accumulate, and accrue those vacation hours based on your own company policy as timesheets are being created. And then under notifications, you can actually set it up so employees get a notification either via email or mobile text message reminding them that they should clock in or clock out, and that is something that you can enable or disable based on your needs. A couple other things to look at in the setup. Under the add-ons section, you can select which advanced functions from Tsheets you want to turn off and turn on, and customize it based on your needs. And also, if you have an outside payroll company such as Gusto or ADP, you can actually connect Tsheets to automatically send those approved timesheets over to your payroll processor. So the payroll processor can process payroll without you having to do any additional work inside QuickBooks, allowing Tsheets to send that information straight to your third-party processor. Under advanced tracking, you can see which additional fields in QuickBooks are being tracked. For example, you can track your classes and your service items when you're entering your time entries inside Tsheets, so that information also flows through the QuickBooks timesheet. Under employees, you can see a list of all your employees that are hooked up with your Tsheets account. You can actually have QuickBooks transfer all the employee information into Tsheets so you don't have to create one by one. Or if you don't have employee information in QuickBooks, you can actually create all the employees inside Tsheets without that information actually transferring over to QuickBooks Online. It's up to you which way you want to do it. Each of your employees will get an email with a link to set up their own Tsheets account that then they can use their smartphone to clock in and clock out of the jobs, on top of being able to clock in and clock out from the Tsheets app itself. Let's go ahead and start by creating a schedule. We're going to click on schedule. We can actually schedule all of our employees' week straight from this screen. So for example, I'm going to choose Carlos. I'm going to click on this day. I'm going to choose the time frame. On the title, I can give specific instructions on what is the work they're going to do. Under customer, I can select from my entire customer list from QuickBooks. This is my actual customer list that I have in QuickBooks Online that is integrated and synced with Tsheets. I'm going to select a specific customer. If there's an address in QuickBooks associated with that customer, that address goes straight into location. Tsheets assumes that most of this work is being done on site. You can remove that if you want to, if you're working with timesheets from folks working at the office or at a work location. It doesn't necessarily have to be on-site work, but Tsheets assumes that that's how work gets done. So the actual address from the customer translates automatically, and you can choose whether or not you want that. Then I'll go ahead and click on publish, and they'll ask me to notify my employee that they've been scheduled for a job. I'll go ahead and click on send, and that employee will get an email or a text message based on the settings, letting them know that they've been assigned to work a particular shift. Let's go ahead and enter a timesheet for one of our employees. So I'm going to click on time entries. I'm going to click on switch user to choose which of my employees I'm going to do a timesheet for. Select them from our drop-down list, select the week, and then enter the timesheet for last week worked. Once a timesheet is generated based on how many hours they worked for a day, you can also assign the specific customer, job, or project that we're working on simply by clicking on where it says no customer and selecting the customer from the drop-down list. I suggest that you create a customer called admin so you can assign all the time entries that are not specifically associated with a customer or job. That way you can also track both our project time and our non-project time. Then finally, you select the service item, and that's going to be the item from your products and services list that you would invoice your customer, assuming that this time is billable. Whether you invoice your customer or not for it, it is a required item for it to generate reports. And then once that's completed, you click on save. We can also add one-off time entries simply by clicking on add time. And in this window, we search for the employee that we're doing the entry for, number of hours, customer, item, and optional notes. Then I click on save, and our timesheet gets updated. Click on save, and that is done. Now let's see what that looks like on the Tsheets app. So I'm logged in as one of the employees that's going to open up their phone and open up the Tsheets app and be able to clock in, clock out, add notes, all from the app. So they take a look at the app and they see that they've been scheduled to go work at a job. Once they're ready to clock in, they're going to click on the job on the schedule. They're going to see all their schedules that are set up for the future. They're going to click on the particular job they need to clock in for. And assuming they arrive to the job, they just click on clock in. At this point, the system has officially clocked them in. They can make a change if they need to change to a different project that they need to clock into. They can pick the service item from our item list. Click on hours. And they can add some notes. They can also click on attachments. They can take a picture of whatever location they're in, click on add photos, and include the attachment in that actual time entry. At this point, the employee will just put the phone away and get to work. You can click on who's working, and you'll see right here on the right-hand side who's currently clocked in for your organization using Tsheets. You can see how long they've been clocked in for and how long they've been clocked in at the most current job. If you click on the location icon, it'll give you a map and it'll tell you exactly the GPS location that the phone had when the employee clocked in. If you click on the edit button, you can see all the details related to that time entry. Click on save. And back in the app here, once the employee is finished working, they can actually click on the switch button to switch to another job if they're gonna continue to work, but then they're gonna be assigning that time to a different project, or they can simply just click on clock out and they'll be done with their shift. On Tsheets, eventually when you refresh the window, the employee is no longer under the who's working screen because it's off the clock. Now let's move on to reports. We're gonna go ahead and click on their schedule reports and click on scheduled versus worked. Pick the week and then click on run report. For example, in this particular case, you see how Carlos was scheduled to work 2 hours and he worked 5 hours instead, a difference of 3.17 hours. You can print this report or export to Excel if you want to do further analysis. Let's go ahead and close that. Under schedule reports, we also have a tardis report. A tardis report will let you know who arrived late based on the schedule. So for example, in this particular case, looks like Steve was scheduled to come in at 9 a.m. and he's scheduled at 9:17 a.m. So you have a specific report that tells you whether people are not clocking in after the scheduled time. Next report we're going to look at is our payroll report. We're going to click on payroll report, select the pay period, click on run, and this is going to tell us each of our employees how many hours they have worked for this week. You get a complete breakdown whether they're straight hours, PTO hours, or overtime hours. You can also click on any specific employee and get a breakdown on which projects they were working on for that week and the timesheet information. The next report is a project report. Under the project report, we also select the specific week and then click on run report. And they will have information about all of our projects and how many hours are being spent on each project across all of our employees. The next report is the approvals report. The approvals report will give me a summary of all the hours that have been worked for that week or the specific time range that we choose. And then we're going to choose which of these timesheets are approved and ready to be processed for payroll. So we click on the employees that we're going to approve. And once they're approved, they're ready to be processed for payroll. You would click on export approved time and then click on export all hours. They'll be able to go into QuickBooks, click on the new transactions button, and then click on weekly timesheet. Pick the week that I want to review the timesheets for, and all of the time entries that were entered in Tsheets are now in QuickBooks. In QuickBooks, you can also go into approved time, and you will see the exact same time approval report function that you saw inside the Tsheets app, but all integrated within and inside of QuickBooks. This allows you to approve timesheets inside QuickBooks without using the Tsheets app. Essentially, being able to use Tsheets as a standalone mobile clock in and clock out system and QuickBooks as the actual approver of that time in and out. If you ever need to get into Tsheets because you need to edit the timesheets and make adjustments, you could always do that. But having the built-in integrated approval within QuickBooks allows you to finish the workflow without having to stop and go into the timesheets app, which is going to be beneficial for a lot of folks that need to process payroll rather quickly. And then at this point, you will process payroll through QuickBooks Online the way you normally would, and the timesheet data would transfer straight into the paycheck. So for example, we go into workers, run payroll. All of our paychecks are ready to be created with the time entries that were transferred straight from Tsheets. And you can create your paychecks extremely fast once all the timesheet data has been settled using the Tsheets app. And with a few clicks using QuickBooks Online Payroll and Tsheets, you'll be done. Lastly, if those time entries were marked as billable, you can use those time entries to simply create invoices within QuickBooks Online using those time entries. Let's take a look at those weekly timesheets just to see which entries have been marked as billable. For example, for this week, Steven worked on the Mary Lewis job for about 29 hours. Let's assume that those hours are billable. That means we're planned to invoice our customer for those specific hours. So we're going to click on the billable checkbox, and then we're going to put the rate that we plan to bill Mary for. So let's say it's $75. Then we'll go ahead and click on Save and Close. And then to create the invoice for our customer, we click on the New Transactions button, and then we click on Invoice. We select our customer name from the drop-down menu. And immediately on the right-hand side, you're going to get a drawer letting you know that there is billable time pending to be added to the invoice. You can just click on Add All, and all of those days that our employee worked in this job will be automatically added with the notes, if there happen to be notes in the timesheet, into the invoice itself, making it really, really easy to create invoices from billable time from your timesheets. In summary, when we think of Tsheets, we think of a solution that allows us to do a couple of things. One, capture time from our employees, either through a web application, a phone app, or a kiosk solution. Those time entries can be assigned projects and add notes to them. Then those timesheets go into a system in which a manager approves them to be ready to be sent into payroll. Then you can use an outside payroll company such as ADP or Gusto to process the payroll from the timesheet, or you can process payroll all within QuickBooks. You also have the option to approve those timesheets inside the QuickBooks integrated Tsheets app. And finally, you can use your time entries to bill your customers to create invoices from billable time if you're doing time and materials type jobs. The next app for review is called Harvest. We're going to click on the Apps tab on the left-hand side. Then we're going to type Harvest. Click on the Harvest icon. Click on Learn More and follow the prompt for the setup. In this demo of Harvest, we're first going to do an app setup and a general overview. Then we're going to create a new time entry, followed by creating a new project and assigning projects to team members. Then we're going to use a phone app to log some project hours remotely. Then we're going to use the project's dashboard to track a project's most pertinent information in summary. Then we're going to track some labor budget and project expenses, followed by creating an invoice from the billable time and billable expenses. And then we're going to show you how to create estimates. Finally, we're going to show you how QuickBooks Online and Harvest integrate together so you can see the workflow. It is important to mention that we're setting up Harvest from the perspective of the small business user. If you're an accounting professional that needs to add this app to your client's QuickBooks file, you may need to request administrative access. And once the Harvest account is created, you're going to see a couple of buttons on the top of the screen. Under Time, you'll be able to create timesheets and approve timesheets, which you will assign to jobs or projects. Under Expenses, you can also track, on top of tracking time, you can also track expenditures made for a specific project, really meant to track those expenses as billable when the invoices are created in the future. Under Projects, you're going to have all the customers and the projects on one place with a quick snapshot of how many hours and how much billable expenses are still pending to be created. Under Team, you'll be able to add all the team members you would like to be using Harvest in order to collaborate time tracking and expense tracking. Under Reports, you get a summary of all the projects and the outstanding hours that have been tracked for that project. Under Invoices is where you're going to create invoices in Harvest. There's also an estimate section that allows you to create an estimate before you create the invoice. And under Manage, you can manage all your lists. So your list of clients, the list of items used to identify what type of activity is being tracked in a specific time entry, expense categories to see in the drop-down menu every time a new expense is created, and roles so you can group your employees doing time tracking based on their role in the organization. Let's start with a time entry. So we'll click on Time. We're going to click on New Entry. We're going to select which project we're going to be working on. We're going to select the activity type and the number of hours. Then we click on Save Entry, and that's it. That activity has been logged to that specific project. Let's go ahead and create a new project. I'm going to click on Projects, click on New Project, select my current client from the client list, and we'll call this one Project 101. We'll select the date range for this project. I will select whether this is going to be a fixed fee project or a time and materials project. I'm going to go ahead and select an hourly rate of $75 an hour, and I'll select a budget of a total of 100 hours. Then I'm going to scroll down and click on Save Project. Right, my Project 101 is created. Now let's assume that one of the employees is going to use the phone app to log in and log some hours towards this project. Then we're going to go over to Team, select our team member, Robert Miller, click on Edit Profile, and we're going to assign the new project to them as well. And click on Assign Projects. Now this particular team member is going to be working on these 2 projects. So let's see what that looks like. Robert, one of the employees, is using the phone app, and they're going to log in some hours towards the project. They're going to click on New Activity. They're going to select which project they're going to be working on, select the type of activity, add the date, and the number of hours. Click on Save, and they're done. Back in Harvest, we can click on the project, and we can see the 10 hours that have been worked on this project. There's an internal cost associated with each employee, which you can set them up in Harvest to calculate more or less the cost of that employee. And you can also see clearly how much budget you have remaining in terms of number of hours allocated for that project. If you scroll down, you can see all the activities based on the hours assigned per activity. Then when I click on Team, I can see which member has worked on this project the most. Let me log in some hours for this project. When I click on Time Entry, click on New Entry, select the project, select the activity. I add 25 hours into this project and click on Save Entry. Now we'll go back to Projects, click on Project 101. Now we can see how many hours have been spent on this project and the budget remaining. When we click on Team, we can see who has worked on each project and how many hours. In this particular case, notice that this employee doesn't have a cost rate. We click on Fix It. It would then take us to the setup screen where we can say how much this employee costs. So we put the billable rate and the internal cost rate and click on Update Info. Immediately as we go down to our internal costs for the project, so if you scroll down, you can see your cost based on time entry. And when I click on Team, you can see your cost based on team member. Finally, when I click on Invoice, there's no invoices linked to this project. I can click on New Invoice. I can select how do I want to show the billable hours in the invoices and how I want to treat those for the purpose of invoicing. And then we're going to click on Review Invoice in the bottom of the screen. Harvest will automatically create a new invoice, adding up the time frame of all the hours being worked, all the hours being tracked, quantity, and the billable rate for the project that we set previously. And then we'll click on Send Invoice. The customer will get an invoice via email. And if you click on Web Invoice, you'll see exactly what that would look like. This is what the customer receives when you email them that invoice. If you click on the Configure tab under Invoices, and then under Online Payment, you can enable either Stripe or PayPal to be used to collect payments digitally when these invoices are sent to the customers via email. Now let's go to Reports. I'm going to click on Reports, and I'll be able to see how many hours we have tracked in total in Harvest, our total billable amount, and a breakdown per client and per project. We can also track expenses. I'm going to click on the Expenses tab, click on New Expense, select which project the expense is going to be for. On the notes, we'll put here the notes related to the expense. We can attach a receipt, a statement, whatever we want to attach. Then we can add the dollar amount of that expenditure that we're recording, and we can mark it whether or not this is going to be a billable expense. This is kind of important because if it is going to be a billable expense, it's going to show up on the next invoice. When the invoice is created, Harvest will prompt you to add that line item into the invoice. Save expense, go back into my reports. Then I can click on Expense tab under Reports, click on Run Expense Report, and I'll be able to see all the expenses that have been allocated to each of the jobs. You can also filter these and select a specific project or job, click on Update Expense Report, and now you have an expense report per project. At this point, we can export to Excel, PDF, or print. These expenses can be marked as invoice or uninvoiced, so you can also keep track of which of these you have been reimbursed for already. Now let's go ahead and do an estimate. We're going to click on Estimates. We click on New Estimate, select the customer or project we want to do an estimate for, select the dollar amount, and then click on Save Estimate. You can click on Send Estimate to send an email to your customer for them to approve the estimate. And once they open the email, we're going to click on Web Estimate to see what that would look like. And your customer at that point can click Accept Estimate or Decline. Once they click on Accept or Decline, and you're back in Harvest, the status will update and it will let you know that the estimate has been accepted and you can start working on the project. You can also create an invoice straight from the estimate if you want to. Click on New Invoice, make any modifications as needed, and then click on Send Invoice. Now, it's important to note that most of this information is actually not being shared with QuickBooks Online. Your entire customer and project list is completely separate from QuickBooks, and it has its own database inside Harvest. Time entries and expense entries are also 100% independent from QuickBooks, and they're only inside of the Harvest database. Essentially, the only information that we want to transfer from Harvest into QuickBooks will be the final invoices. So when I click on Invoices and then click on Overview, I'll be able to see all the invoices that have been created inside Harvest. I can also record payments for any of these specific invoices simply by clicking on the specific invoice and then click on Record Payment. And I can receive full payment or partial payment. And then click on Save Payment. Inside Harvest, you will have open invoices with the payment information. Automatically, invoices and payments should sync straight into QuickBooks. If they don't, you can click on Actions and click on Copy to QuickBooks, and that information is going to be sent over to QuickBooks. Now let's go into QuickBooks to see what that looks like. I'm going to click on QuickBooks, click on the Recent Transactions button, then I'll be able to see the invoice that has been created and the payment itself. So I'll click on the invoice, and there it is. That's going to have all the information that was recorded from Harvest originally. And you also get a copy of the payment history. So I click on Payment, and I'll be able to see the specific payment that was received, and it was sent straight into undeposited funds. And then you can follow the regular workflow with QuickBooks to do your banking and your bank reconciliations. Harvest is an extremely simple app, and it's really designed for folks that want to have complete independence of their projects, employees, and time from QuickBooks. They want to use one app, self-contained, that can control all that information and only send the final invoice and the final payment into QuickBooks. In contrast, Tsheets is an app that is fully immersive and fully integrated with QuickBooks. And the data that's being used in Tsheets for the most part is a two-way sync with QuickBooks. Whether you want to process payroll inside QuickBooks or create billable time in QuickBooks, Tsheets will allow you to do that. Whereas Harvest is more designed towards separating the two systems and only integrating at that invoice level. Regardless of which app you go for, you are going to need a system to keep track of all of your projects, your budget, your scheduling, and the actual time spent to each project. In some cases, the time spent for the projects are relevant to understanding job costing and job profitability. And in other cases, the time is simply just needed in order to invoice your customers in time. Both apps should help solve this problem and make you more efficient in QuickBooks.